briefly after, how do we work with these definitions of good or evil? And especially, how do you do so if we're in like subjective morality terms where good for me can mean different from, or good from the other person, or bad or evil for me can mean different from bad to the other person? So how do you make these arbiter judgments upon, a supreme being if everyone has different definitions of this? And that's something I was thinking about in this discussion. That'd be interesting to hear more of what your guys' thoughts are.
I think probably just for the I think probably for the most simplistic communication of it, usually the problem of evil is discussing some unjustified wrongdoing that occurs onto a person. The simplest one is probably a murder or a killing, or someone's consent being violated sexually of some matter. Something most of us would agree that is like an unspeakable evil, or an evil that is so wrong that like I don't think there's a rationale we can provide to it that would not make it or articulate it to be evil. But for the most part, I think most people are talking about some undue wrong or undue bad that is happening to them. So mostly that's why it is inquired as why would this have occurred to me, and how unjustified it feels.
All right, thank you very much. John, you were going to say something earlier, and then we could go over to King.
Yeah, no. I think that making a distinction here, right, between an example where I would completely agree with what Hazy just said is, those are evil acts, right? We would call those morally evil and completely repugnant and things that cannot be justified morally at all, right? But when I say what do we mean by evil, right? What is the nature of evil? I'm thinking in kind of a more metaphysical or ontological framework, right? What precisely is an evil that is suffered, right? Is it a positive entity? Is it an object? Is evil an object in the world, or is evil the absence of an object, the absence of something good? And without getting into a full spiel here, I would completely agree with your judgment about those things being evil, and those things occur, right? And thus I don't dispute the premise, right, that evil things occur. But rather, I think that, at least for my tradition, it's going to be important to make a distinction about the character of evil suffered and what kind of ontological status they have, because it seems to me that there's kind of two aspects to the problem of evil, right? That kind of need to be separated out or teased apart. One is God a cause of evils occurring, insofar as He created the world and the world has evil in it, right? Is God causally responsible for evil? Put aside moral responsibility, right? If God has no obligation to prevent evil and God causes evil to exist, right, then there would be, if I deny God has a moral obligation to prevent evil, then I'm being fully consistent. Maybe I'm not being consistent with the kind of religious view of God that I propose, right? But that would be a way to avoid the problem, yeah? If I say God has no obligation to prevent that, right? Yeah. So on the one hand, we have the question of, is God a cause of evil existing, right? And then secondly, right, we have, is God on the hook for allowing or not preventing evil? And I think that's kind of what Hazy was kind of getting into. And I think that really is at the heart of this problem. And it's something which, I think the logical problem of evil is something that can be easily dealt with philosophically. But I don't think that it's something that can be easily dealt with in terms of fully coming to grasp with if there's a completely consistent account as to why God would allow evils to occur. Why He would permit a particular evil is still something mysterious and still something that troubles us, and that anyone who's not troubled by the existence of these moral evils, such as Hazy mentioned, right, hasn't really reflected on the issue, right? Hasn't thought deeply on this. So I would distinguish between the puzzle or the logical problem of evil and the mystery of evil, which is something which I think that Mordechai was kind of bringing up a little bit with his references to Job.
Okay. We're going to go over to Waltuh now, and then we're going to go to King after. Go ahead, Waltuh.
Yeah, I guess if we're gonna try and I guess do the definition game when it comes to evil, I guess even though as an atheist, it's kind of hard to think of a good definition of evil to ground in things. It's not really just as simple as the absence of good or just not really good things and just a really bad thing. I guess I would take this philosophical idea that evil can be described as incredibly malicious actions on innocent parties for an unjustified reasons. There's no moral justification for it, and that we can look to see that even the story of Job is a very good example of one such scenario where Job, for all intents and purposes, is a completely innocent man who befalls tragedy after tragedy for seemingly no reason, is completely undeserving of it. We might say that's evil, but we might say that that's God's will, so it must be good. And then we might look at places like Sodom and Gomorrah, which were smited and which were destroyed in not the exact same fashion as Job, but obviously were destroyed. And it was seemingly the justification with this that they were sinners and they had done something wrong, and that they had strayed away with their free will from God's intended purpose. So I guess in that action, I'd like to point out that there's just what the term of innocent victims and how evil factors into this. But I guess I just wanted to put out that kind of definition of evil, at least from an atheist perspective.
Okay, thank you very much. And we're gonna go over to King now. And Mordechai, since he brought up the Book of Job, if you want to enlighten us or throw in your commentary more on that, that'll be appreciated. Then we can go to Hazy. So go ahead, King.
Well, in regards to what I meant when I'm talking about evil, because we were thinking about that for a moment, I'm not a Platonist. So even though I do read a lot of Plato, as everyone here likely knows, I am not a Platonist in regards to the idea of there being grades of being. And in fact, like a classical Asherite, I am in fact an atomist. And so I do not believe in grades of being. And so I can't hold to this idea that there's less being when there's an evil thing, quote, quote, that occurs. I can't hold to that view. And I would have to hold that's untenable. But what I mean when I say evil is that it's prohibited by the divine command. I'm a divine command theorist, and I would like to clarify what I mean in regards to my own divine command theory. Imam Sanusi, he says in his book that is now translated actually into English by Sheikh Musa Ferber, that just as it is impossible that God will act for a purpose, it is likewise impossible that his ruling and act as being an obligation or prohibition or some other legal ruling is for some specific purpose. And the reason is because all actions in reality in respect to God are equal in that they are all his creation. So they are all composed of atoms. They're all composed of this fundamental particle or substance. There's no real fundamental difference when you just compare them. That you would just say, oh, this thing intrinsically is evil or this thing is intrinsically good in particular. And this is in contrast to someone who is, let's say, a Platonist who would say, well, this thing is intrinsically good or this thing is intrinsically evil. So that's where I'm coming from when I'm talking about that issue in particular. And that's why I said earlier that I am what you would call a theistic subjectivist. And I don't think that that's a good good term to use, because I do think that morality is something that's technically out there in the world, in the sense that God actually did make these commands and prohibitions and things and so on and so forth. But I don't think that these are commands or prohibitions are due to the intrinsic natures of things in particular. So God could have, at least logically could have, commanded any of these particular things. Let's say, instead of stealing is wrong, stealing is a-okay. Go ahead, take that pencil. Go ahead, let me see, I don't know. Be gay? I don't know. I don't know. Or whatever else. So that's the position that the Asherite school took, at least historically. But I would note also that just because something's logically possible does not mean that it's actual or metaphysically necessary. So that we also make that distinction there.
Okay. John, were you raising your hand or?
Yeah. Yeah. So I would say that based off what King was just saying, at least going back to the original framing I was proposing, right? That there's a logical problem here. Do these propositions actually constitute a contradiction? And at least, and I would say, although I